Welcome to another edition of Journey of Hope. Stories of people that have been impacted by the healing ministry of Loma Linda University Medical Center. People from around the world come to Loma Linda seeking health and healing and hope and wholeness. Our special guest today is Edgar Miller, all the way from London, England. And he's got an interesting story and a fascinating journey that has led him here to Loma Linda. Edgar, it's good to have you here.
So pleased to be here.
And we've got people from around the world that are watching, and you've got a very interesting background. Would like to have you share a little bit about where you're from. I know that you've been living over in England for 20, 30 years, but you really got your start over here in Texas.
That's right. I was actually born on a ranch in Muleshoe, Texas, of all places.
Now, where is that?
That's up in the Panhandle between Amarillo and Lubbock.
Okay.
And grew up in Texas, went to the University of Texas, then went on to MIT for graduate school.
Well, now, you went to the University of Texas, but what were you taking?
I was studying engineering in a program called Engineering Science.
Okay. And go ahead.
Well, then after that, I went to MIT, studied, got a master's degree in electrical engineering, and during this time, both before and after, I worked for Texas Instruments and Fairchild Semiconductor up in Silicon Valley here, so that was my first Californian experience.
Really?
Then I decided I didn't want to be an engineer all my life, and so I found myself at Harvard Business School.
This is after
that was after Fairchild,
okay.
And then after that. And I took a summer job with a consulting firm called McKinsey & Company in London.
Now, was this after at Harvard?
That was the summer between it was a summer job between the 2 years of business school.
Okay.
Fell in love with London immediately and thought McKinsey was a nice place to work. So I found myself in 1969 moving to London for good. Really? And worked there for 14 years. And was headhunted to start a venture capital fund in New York for a New York investment bank called Dillon Read & Company.
Okay, now wait a minute, I want to stop you because you went to McKinsey kind of almost like a summer job?
For a summer job, absolutely, between the 2 years of business school.
And McKinsey, for our listening audience, is one of the world's largest consulting firms?
Yes, a management consulting firm all over the world, very well known in the business and corporate world, but also in the nonprofit sector as well.
Yes, well, I know I've gotten acquainted with some of the other people that have come from McKinsey, and so you went over there.
As a matter of fact, there's been, I would say, half a dozen former McKinsey people that have come here, which is one of the reasons I'm here.
Right, I mean, word of mouth gets out. So you went over there, but you fell in love both with McKinsey and with London.
Yes,
okay.
Particularly London.
All right, particularly London. So you worked with McKinsey for a number of years.
14 years.
14 years, and then what?
Well, I got an offer out of the blue, as headhunters sometimes do, and decided to, and that was to start to be a founding partner of a venture capital firm in New York that was sponsored.
So you were living in London.
Yes.
And you had an office over in New York?
No, this was a separate company.
Oh, separate.
I was made an offer to move from London to New York.
Okay.
And start this venture capital fund in New York for an investment bank, which has long since been bought up, but called Dillon Read & Company.
Okay.
And I spent the next 8 years doing what venture capitalists do, spending my life on the red eye between California and New York.
Back and forth, and finding
back and forth.
Clients and
cultivating
relationships.
Making investments. And after 8 years of this, we were raising our fourth fund. And I felt then it was time to sort of rethink about what I was doing. I loved being in the States, but I found the joie de vivre that I had feeling in London just wasn't there.
Really, it wasn't there.
So I came back to London.
Okay.
And
I mean, did you just kind of venture out to London, or did you have something you wanted to do when you got over there?
Well, I found something to do while I was still at Dillon Read. I joined a Frenchman named Pierre Moussa, who had been chairman of the flagship investment banking firm of Paribas in France. And he had left Paribas and formed a group called Palace. And I joined them to head up their private equity activities and to do a variety of other things. And it was a great way to get back. And he and I had gotten to know each other through Dillon Read because Dillon Read had an investment in his company.
Now, just out of curiosity, did you pick up a language or two while you were over in Europe?
Very poorly. I speak a bit of Spanish, which goes back to high school Spanish, and a touch of French. My French bosses thought I was so deplorable in French that they sent me to a course. I'm afraid they didn't get their money's worth.
Okay, so you were working for this other group, but you finally ventured out on your own.
Yes, that's right.
And what did you do?
Well, after being at this group called Palace a number of years, events evolved in such a way that I was given the opportunity to buy the part of the business that I was running, which was a small investment banking organization. So I took that over myself, changed the name to Palladian Limited, and refocused it on my first love, which was technology. So this became a boutique investment bank that was working with clients in the technology sector throughout Europe.
Okay.
And I might also add Israel, because Israel is the Silicon Valley of Europe.
So, and have you been spending a lot of time traveling throughout Europe and
Yes.
going
Oh, yes.
and Israel then?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's been a long time ago. That was in the early 90s that I did that. I've been doing that ever since.
And it's just continued to grow and expand and
yeah.
so forth. Now, tell me about your family and your health of your family, because you had some cancer in the background?
No, absolutely not. I'm the first pioneer of cancer.
The pioneer for
in my
the family.
And,
okay. And a couple of many months ago, you began a journey.
Yes.
You discovered what?
Well, I discovered, like most people who have prostate cancer, my PSA started going up. I had to biopsy, and bingo, I discovered I had cancer. Yeah.
You win. So, but you're unlike some other people. I mean, they find out they got cancer, and they think they've got a death sentence rather than a diagnosis. And you know, they go to the doctor, and you know, they're willing to listen to whatever the doctor says. However, when you learned you had cancer, you really went on a journey.
I did.
Tell us and our listening audience, because there are people here that are watching that have had one form or another of some type of cancer they just learned about this past week or two. And you've been on a very interesting journey, a very fascinating journey. You've turned everything upside down and explored all the different options. So how long ago did you learn that you had cancer?
I learned I had cancer the last week of September.
Okay. So many months ago. Almost a year ago.
Yeah.
And when you found out you had cancer, I mean, how did you react to that?
Well, just one thing I don't think I've ever told you before. Literally, 2 days before I discovered I had prostate cancer, I also discovered I had a melanoma on my back.
No,
Completely
I didn't realize.
coincidentally.
Okay.
So I had to deal with both of these things at the same time. The melanoma has long since been taken care of.
Okay.
The interesting thing about the prostate cancer is I found out the night before I was leaving to fly to the States and spend a long weekend with a bunch of my business school buddies and go to my business school reunion. And it turns out of the 6 buddies, including me, 4 of them had had prostate cancer.
Really?
So you can imagine
4 out of the 6.
4 out of the 6. And so you can imagine that weekend, I talked about hardly anything else.
Because you'd just been diagnosed.
I'd just been diagnosed. And I got a lot of advice. One of them had, 2 of them had surgery. One had surgery, then had to follow it with radiation. Another one was doing hormone treatment and radiation. And so I had a huge amount of advice, and I learned a lot about prostate cancer over that weekend.
Okay, so this was the beginning of your journey, okay?
Yes.
So then what did you do?
Well, the general feeling amongst my buddies was that you ought to have surgery. And I remember at dinner one night, one of the wives said to me, she said, if you ask any of the wives, they will all tell you that they think their men should have had surgery, which rather surprised me. But you know, I took that aboard, and it turned out that all of them had had a lot of experience with a particular cancer surgeon at Sloan Kettering called Dr. Peter Scardino, who's one of the foremost cancer surgeons in the world. He's written a very large-selling book and so on. And through them and another friend of mine who knows him, I was able to get an appointment with him in about 5 days' time.
Which is very exceptional.
Yes, and he was a wonderful man. And I actually made an operating date. So the first week in October,
scheduled for surgery.
I actually had a date for surgery the week after Thanksgiving. Now, you know, I thought I would still look at things, but that was my intention.
Sure. But there are some things that happened that changed your mind.
Yes. First of all, I went back to England and took a tour through all the various surgeons in England that my doctor in England suggested to.
Now, you kind of had a coach over there, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Well, that was a little bit further, but the first thing that happened was I had heard about Loma Linda. I had also heard something about radiation, but most of my friends who talked about radiation described it in terms that made it seem extremely unappealing. So radiation was something I really wasn't thinking about. And then my lovely sister, who lives in Houston, sent me an email, very apologetic, saying, look, I know you've done your research, I know you know what you want to do, but why don't you talk to this friend of ours who's been to a place called Loma Linda? So just out of being nice to my sister, courtesy, I rang this man, and for the first 5 or 10 minutes of the conversation, I was listening politely and saying yes, 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 looking at my watch. And then he happened to mention he was a surgeon.
Just casually.
And I thought, okay. And then he discovered that he had also been to Peter Scardino. So then I thought, and then as he told me about his experience here, that conversation made me think, I've really got to look at this seriously. So
there may be some other options.
Yes. So I then went on to, I somehow had heard about Bob Marchini's website. So I went on that, and lo and behold, I discovered that one of my former McKinsey partners had been to Loma Linda. So I rang him up, and he couldn't have been more helpful, and we spent hours on the phone together. He then introduced me to Bob Marchini. Bob Marchini then spent hours on the phone with me. I then discovered that another 2 or 3 McKinsey partners had been here, so I talked to them, which was great because I knew I could calibrate these people.
You had confidence
I had confidence in them. I knew they were highly objective, highly analytical, and weren't really telling me anything that wasn't really true. Bob very kindly introduced me to half a dozen people who had been here that I spoke to. And then I ran into the person you mentioned too, a friend in London who is the head of endocrine surgery at one of the teaching hospitals in London. Mm-hmm. And he's had quite a lot of experience with cancer, although not prostate cancer. And he is a prodigious researcher. He spent 20 years doing biomedical research before doing endocrine surgery. And when I met him, he told me 2 things. He said, first of all, if you have an alternative therapy to surgery that achieves more or less the same results, do it.
Just right up front.
Right up front. He said, I'm a surgeon.
Sure.
I know what happens. Things go wrong, and the side effects are completely different than having radiation. And secondly, he had heard, by this time, of course, I knew about proton beam and Loma Linda, and he said to me, I've had patients do proton beam in Germany, and I actually think that in 10 years' time, that's going to be the standard of cure for prostate cancer.
He told you that right up front. Wow.
But he was extremely helpful because he supplied me with all the relevant papers in the field. And then as I went around and talked to various doctors and heard various pros and cons of this, he would always provide the paper that actually was on the subject and would allow me to really understand. And I'm just the sort of person who, I'm a bit anal, so I enjoy reading these things and getting down to the facts.
So he was pulling out all the relevant articles for you.
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
what a tremendous
And
help.
being a terrific sounding board. I mean, some days we talked 3 times. And
really?
I think there was probably one day we must have spent 4 hours on the phone. And how he did this in the middle of an operating schedule, I don't know.
Must have a close relationship.
But he was just wonderful. So little by little, and then I finally got to the point where I had to face up to the fact of calling Peter Scardino and telling him I was having second thoughts. He could not have been nicer.
That's great.
He said, you are asking the absolute right question. The question is surgery versus radiation. And there's pros and cons of both. The cure rates are roughly the same. The side effects are different. And everybody comes up with a different trade-off about how they feel about the side effects. He encouraged me to look at it.
Very objective. That's great.
Didn't give me any problem whatsoever. And he very kindly introduced me to another preeminent doctor at Mass General, Dr. William Shipley, where they have both radiation, both standard radiation and proton beam.
Right.
So he very kindly, by email, started helping me think through this. And to make a long story short, through this process, I collected half a dozen doctors from around the world on both sides of the Atlantic who gave their time hugely willingly.
Half a dozen doctors
And
across the country, around the world.
well, around
really.
the world.
Yeah, around the world.
Yeah, three were in England, and the rest were in the U.S. And they couldn't have been nicer. And then eventually I went around and saw all of them, and effectively, without realizing it, became my own oncologist with the help of my friend in London.
You became as knowledgeable, if not more so, than many of them.
And I found toward the end of this process that I was aware of papers that they hadn't yet read. And so I was in a pretty good position to look at the pros and cons. And to make a very long story short, I decided to come to Loma Linda.
So, but you just didn't immediately come. I mean, there was a couple of other things you wanted to do before you came, or you did come over. You had your consult.
Yes.
And but, you know, tell our listening audience what it was that you decided to do.
Well, I discovered through my own research, in a way, that my cancer was a little bit worse than everybody was telling me it was. There's a tendency for surgeons to tell you that, oh, you're early, you caught it, no problem, nerve-sparing surgery is a very high option, etc. And I was getting quite a lot of that from people. But partly through my friend in London and partly through my own efforts, I began to realize, looking at the biopsy data and a few other things, that maybe it wasn't quite so black and white. And then ultimately, I was very fortunate to meet Dr. Anthony D'Amico at the Dana-Farber in Boston. And he was able to provide a very powerful MRI scan, which is more powerful than most MRIs that you see. And that showed that maybe I had the cancer might have been out of the prostate gland.
The possibility.
Yeah, there was a possibility. It wasn't sure. It was very hard to tell from the MRI, because MRIs at the best of times are very, very hard to read. But it did say that you couldn't say for certainty that the cancer was contained within the capsule, and that it might possibly have been invaded into the seminal vesicles. So once I knew that, then the game changed, because that meant that there was always the chance of cancer cells being in the general pelvic region. And that meant that just proton beam was not enough, because the proton beam isn't wide enough to cover the whole pelvic region. So that meant I had to think about signing up for IMRT, i.e. the standard X-ray that could cover the entire pelvic region. And once I made that decision, well, then the case for having a hormone treatment became rather compelling. If you have a simple cancer, there's not much point, but the whole point of, as you know,
Sure.
of hormone therapy is to basically debulk and damage the cancer cells before you start radiation, to make the radiation more effective. So after a bit of soul searching and talking and so on, I decided to do these things. And that held up my program, because you'll remember you helped me get an early admission in, and then no sooner had you done that than I discovered I had to take 3 months to have hormone therapy, so we had to put everything back.
Yeah.
And therefore I didn't start until April.
So you had the hormones, and you finished up your treatments, and you had both proton and photon.
Yes.
And tell me about this matter of having cancer. And you were here, and you finished your treatments. I mean, were you a sick patient while you were here?
No, I had several objectives when I came here. One was to get cured, obviously.
Okay, first one to get cured.
Second was to get fitter than I'd ever been. Third one was to learn golf. The fourth was to brush up my tennis. And the fifth was to get myself fit for polo, because I'm a polo player.
So you want to get overall fit. You wanted to first of all, you want to be cured. First things first.
Yes.
You want to be cured. Then you want to get fit. And then you wanted to learn golf.
Yeah.
And then you wanted to brush up on your tennis. And then you wanted to get fit for polo. So you're a polo player.
Yes.
Yeah, I was telling you earlier, I don't know that many polo players, but apparently there are some places over here in the United States that do play polo. Well,
just to tell you, I mean, 50 minutes away are the two major centers of polo in the United States, in the Palm Springs area.
I did not realize that. Well, you've taken care of the treatment, so we got number one out of the way.
That's done.
You'll get the results. That's checked off. Tell me about what were you doing to get fit while you were here?
Well, I was going to your wonderful gym, the Drayson Center, and I don't always do it, but I try to go every day, and I do cardio fitness one day and weights the next day. And I think that's made a huge difference because I have not had a single side effect the entire time I've been through. Not one bit of intestinal problems, not a single bit of fatigue, nothing.
Oh, I am so glad to hear that.
And I think part of this was simply because of the fitness program.
Now, I know that while you were here, you bought a set of golf clubs.
Yes.
Now, tell me about your golf.
Well, as I told you, I had an objective to, I had sort of played around with golf, but I'd never really had any lessons or learned it. So I thought, there's all these golf courses here. I have time on my hands. Why not? And within the first 45 seconds of showing up at Loma Linda, I bumped into a fellow patient named Roger Clark, who's a great guy, and we're going to end up being lifetime friends. And he is a fanatic golfer. And he very kindly took me out the first day, and another funny thing, it was the condominium that I was renting had a spare set of golf clubs in the garage. So I took these, went out and played, and you were playing that day as well. It was the first time I'd managed to have some lessons over the weekend. So I'd had 2 lessons. You did
unbelievably well.
And I went out and played with you and Roger, and he coached me, and within 10 days I was hooked. I went around, bought a set of clubs, and have been...
And I know the clubs work very well. Well, so you are a quick learner.
Well, I have a very good set of clubs.
Around. Yeah, you got a good set of clubs, you had a good instructor, and your golf game is coming along reasonably well. Well, now tell me about being fit for polo.
Well, you can be generally fit, but as you can appreciate, when you ride a horse, you're using a lot of muscles that you don't normally use. And I haven't been on, before I came here, I hadn't been on a horse since last September. So it's very important to get yourself back, get these muscles going, because otherwise you will wish you weren't living a day or two after your first polo match. Plus, it's dangerous because you don't have the strength. And I was also a little worried because one of the side effects of hormone therapy is that you have muscle loss. And I'm glad to say through my work in the Drayson, I have completely reversed that.
That's unbelievable. That you're training for polo while you're undergoing cancer treatment.
Yeah, yeah.
So now, have you been on a horse since you've been out here?
Yeah, yeah. I'm going up every few days up to the Empire Polo Club in Indio and riding a horse. I'm going up this Thursday afternoon, and on Friday morning I'm playing some practice matches.
This is unbelievable.
And I leave when I go back. 2 days after I'm back, I'm playing a polo match.
That is unbelievable. And remember, you've been undergoing cancer treatment.
Yeah, I look really sad.
Yeah, it does not sound like a cancer patient. Well, now, what difference is having cancer, is it making to you?
Hopefully none. I'm lucky in that when I heard this, needless to say, it wasn't exactly the news I was hoping to hear, particularly the fact that I found I had a melanoma at the same time.
Sure, kind of a double whammy, wasn't it?
But I just took the view, you've got a car that's broken, you've got to repair the car. So the question is, find the best mechanic. I just looked at it that way.
And boy, have you searched for the mechanic. I mean, the process that you've gone through, very few that I've known in the years that I've been here have gone through as many different places, centers of excellence, and collaborating and actually having a coach, so where he's been able to pull up all the research articles for you. I mean, you've learned as much as some of the doctors undoubtedly that you've talked to.
Well, that's going a bit far, but...
Well, I'm talking about in terms of your particular case and doing the research and reading articles that apparently some of them haven't even...
But just a general point out of this, I haven't thought about this deeply, but I actually think there is a role for anybody who has any kind of cancer, if they can find a medical sounding board to them, it makes an incredible difference because it's a very emotional process. You don't understand all the lingo quite often. And to have somebody who is your friend, that you trust, who helps you interpret all these conflicting bits of advice you get from the medical field.
Because all kinds of things are coming at you, and pretty hard to sort through it.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe a general thought that people ought to think about.
So, now that you've had cancer, how is it going to make a difference for you?
Well, in my day-to-day life, I'm assuming it's going to make no difference.
Okay.
Except that I'm now fitter than I used to be, and I know how to play golf. But it's going to make differences in other ways. First of all, the experience of being at Loma Linda for 9 or 10 weeks and getting a chance to step off the merry-go-round and think about what's important to you in life and what's going on and what you really want to do when you leave Loma Linda is an amazing experience. And I heard people before I came here saying that it was a life-changing experience.
You mean
And,
coming to Loma Linda?
yeah, and I thought, oh, rubbish. But it is. It is. And it's going to change, it changed the way I live my life to a degree. And of course, the obvious thing, I've heard, I've had so much advice and been exposed to so much information about nutrition, about lifestyle, and so on, that I'm going to be taking that to heart. In addition, I hope I can put back something to all the people who are in the same position as I was. I've already had two prospective patients who've been in touch with me. I'm going to try to help them, and I hope that my telephone and email will be as available to them as the ones were to me that helped me.
You will find that people kind of come out of the woodwork, and they will find out, you know, that you came over to the United States and were treated with some kind of special thing. I mean, you know, 20 years later, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, and yet people are still talking about it being experimental. But people come out of the woodwork, and you'll have an opportunity to share with them that there is some place out in California, and there's a number of other centers that are coming up that do utilize proton therapy, and it's a very valid option and least invasive of all the
and don't forget, you have the standard IMRT here as well. So in a case like myself, you have the best of both.
Got the best of both, right. Well, for our listening audience, you know, Edgar is again a wonderful example of people that have traveled from around the world. They found their way here to Loma Linda through a number of circumstances. Out of the hundreds of thousands of people that are diagnosed with cancer, only a few come here to Loma Linda. We don't believe anybody comes here by accident. And Edgar is a good illustration of the impact that has been made by the people here on him. And as he leaves here, he's going to be an ambassador. Again, for those that are looking on, I'm Lynn Martell with Journey of Hope. And some of you have received some sobering news this week. I want to let you know that God's got a plan for your life. Give him an opportunity. He will open and close doors for you.